Today I want to discuss a couple of things. This call is going to be mainly on adjusting your financial numbers for the new year, and for a refresher for some people. But I want to talk kind of first in understanding break even. Is anybody here using break even calculator, or has knowledge of what their break even point is?
I've used it. Needs some updating.
Okay, that's why we're having this call. So, that's something that we want to kind of get in our schedule, and it's something that we want to make sure that we stay on top of. It's something I see almost, almost weekly, is where we're pricing from an old number of break even, or we're pricing from a number where maybe our overheads have fluctuated, our our fixed overheads have changed, and really it leaves us blind, right? Because where we think we're in a profit center, we're actually not. So it's something I recommend that it be done at least monthly, especially for service-based companies. They're especially vulnerable for it. Um, because of the nature of the volume, like the volume fluctuations you guys can have. And I always recommend that we have an overhead recovery, and I'm going to give you guys the formula for that for today. But let's start off with exactly what I'm talking about. I got a quick little video here I want to share with you guys. All right. So you should be looking at your break even points, and when you actually break even. So that's basically when your sales revenue equal your costs, right? We've broken even. All right. So, in order to understand break even, we have to understand the two types of costs. So there's the cost of sales, which is your COGS, labor, material, equipment, rentals, subcontractors, sales commission, and they're directly related to selling of a product or service. Then we have our overhead expenses. Okay, now overhead has two types of overhead. We have our variable overhead, that's like fuel, advertising, office supplies, and we have our fixed overhead, which is like rent, taxes, insurance, utilities. Okay, so if we want to find our total costs, our over operating expenses, all right, we would have to take those two, the total operating expense, and divide it by our gross profit. Okay. So essentially what we should be looking at is, what is that operating percentage, right? So if it's, let's say, for example, your overhead is, 28%. Okay. If you were to base that on your regular volume, let's say a typical month for you is $100,000 in revenue. Okay. And that was a typical January. All right. And then February hits, and we've had a below average revenue month of $80,000. Is your overhead percentage the same or different?
Yes,
No,
different.
no,
No.
it's not. So and this is the mistake, right? Is that if we were pricing in January on a typical $100,000 and we come short of it, we have to adjust our overhead recovery to make up for that loss recovery rate, right? So again, a lot of times we neglect this, and we think that we're in a we think that we're profitable when really our overheads have actually gone up. They can fluctuate, they can change, right? So unless you're doing very consistent business, and this is why most accountants and bookkeepers really don't understand construction, is that we have big swings in revenue, right? We might produce most of our work one month and then just be, kind of finishing it up the following month, where we see sort of revenues gain and fall. And what's important here, is that we're looking at these regularly enough to know where our actual overhead is at. And we're also looking at what point we break even with everything that we're doing. Okay. So, again, break even, it can be calculated a couple of ways, but I want to kind of put this in a few scenarios so we can see how it can benefit our business. So let's take a look at that first. Right. So we want to kind of make sure that we're planning for our profit. Number one, and first and foremost, if you're not paying attention to these things, other things will get in the way. All right. And as the CEO of your business, you're responsible to produce a profit for the shareholder. Okay. If you're not calling that out, and if we're not regularly kind of looking at that and understanding how our numbers will change that, and our current performance can change that, what's going to end up happening is you're going to lose sight of it. All right. So I use, and I think I've shared this with you guys before, but I use a flex budget. All right. It's a little bit more advanced, but there's basically five essential tools that I use to operate my business. One is a break-even calculator, which I've shared with you guys, and I'm gonna share it with you again. If you don't have it, grab it out of the chat. Let me throw this in there for you guys. I've got a couple things in here for you today. Okay, so I'll throw this in here too. And then the SOP on your overhead recovery calculations. There we go. Okay. So a break even, a cash flow projection, all right, and a work in progress report, all right, our sales forecast, okay, and obviously we would be using our profit and loss and all those things. But in order for all those tools to work properly, what do you think that we need to have? What do you think we have to have a very firm understanding of to make those tools effective?
Good data.
Good data, yes, we know that firsthand. So does that good
Yeah.
data come, where's that good data come from? Good skill tester here. So think about it this way here, and here's the problem, right? Here's the elephant in the room is that I bet you nobody here has up-to-date QuickBooks. I very, very rarely do I come across anybody that has their accounting bookkeeping up to date to the minute. Okay. And in general, a regulatory accounting system is behind, right? Meaning it's always lagging. So it's very difficult to kind of see where you are minute to minute. So the alternative to that, and what I highly recommend and a big fan of and use in my own business are these management accounting systems. Okay. So doing a couple of these key things and building it into your routine, having a schedule for these things is super, super important for making really good data-driven decisions. Now, I will stress, management accounting is not perfect. It will never be perfect. All right. But it's enough that gives you an edge and it allows you to understand where you stand currently and where you're tracking to. Okay. So things like who's here's using a cash flow projection? Anybody using a cash flow projection? No? I know we all kind of shudder, but it's eh,
Have
for
one, but
we've had one.
we do
Yeah,
have
so
one, but I don't have time to fill it out.
right? So I'll give you a good example of this. If your market were to slow down, all right, what adjustments are you going to make? What's your go-to thing? How do you know how to respond to it? Right? Or let's say, you catch a lawsuit and suddenly you have to pay out 150 grand. Like what do you do? How are you going to look at solving that problem financially? Okay? Do you see the hole that we have there? If you're not able to answer that, right? The real answer, as far as I'm concerned, is that I'm going to change my overhead recovery to actually absorb that loss. Okay. And then I'm going to look at how that's going to affect my cash flow. I'm also going to look at how I can build it into increasing sales to cover that additional overhead and production. Okay. So let me give you an example. So like if at one point, all right, we are budgeted for, let's say our overhead is, $10,000 a month. Okay. And that would be really nice if it was, right? So we basically have got 120,000 in overhead. Okay. And the net profit we want to make, which you should always be tracking to, is 300,000. Okay. That would mean that we would have to have total gross profit dollars would need to be $420,000. Okay. And if your gross profit is 33%, which it should be a bit higher. Okay. Let's say we want it at 50%. Okay. How much revenue do we need to make? 840,000, right? So in looking at this, for most of us, we should have the ability to kind of look at what our current overhead is, like I just showed you, walking through that, and then building the plan based on that, right? So again, if your overhead is high, all right, compared to most contractors, so a typical average overhead percentage, and this would be percentage of your revenue, sits in around 24 to 35% roughly. A very high one will be above that. Okay. And then that's usually with companies that have, a big equipment bill, stuff like that. Like I usually find that in like operation companies, um, you know, builders typically carry a fairly low overhead. Some service companies have higher overhead depending on how many employees and staff and stuff they have. But we should be trying to find ourselves in that range, right? So again, to make an adjustment, all right, what do we have to do? So like all of a sudden my overhead has spiked, all right? What are we going to do to offset that so that it doesn't affect our profits? Come on, someone.
Increase your break even.
Right. Well, you're going to, yeah, exactly. So you're either going to increase your revenue. All right. So, we're gonna go out and try to do more work, right? We can also change our pricing. All right. So our prices would be able to go up and fluctuate with that. And essentially we would do the same work but at higher profit. If we kind of hit our ceiling there, all right, the only other option is to increase your production, right? But ultimately we should still be looking at the same thing. Okay, we should still be looking at, making sure that we're earning a profit at the end of the day, right? Making sure that we understand, when we've covered costs and at what point do we actually break even in our business. Okay. Too many times guys are going out with a plan that's literally like impossible. All right. So like if you have it in your head that, you should be making or earning $300,000 for the business per year, all right, and you're only planning to do a $500,000 worth of work, all right, that's just not going to happen. Right? That's just like it's mathematically impossible. Okay. So on the other hand, right, most of us don't even know what our overhead is. Okay, we very rarely, a lot of contractors I work with and talk with, they still run their businesses by their bank account. All right. And that's a very dangerous position to be in. Especially because, if you don't understand how the money's coming and going from your business and where your cash is sitting, all right, it can force us into making big mistakes. One of the biggest mistakes that I see most frequently is when a contractor starts to grow, all right, meaning that they acquire more business, which can happen, you know, um, which is a good thing in most sides, but fail to adjust their overhead for taking on that new work. All right. So a good example is a guy that originally was on the tools or, building the jobs, or supervising the jobs themselves and suddenly, has a 25% increase in work. All right. And then prices everything coming in at the same rate as if he was still supervising the work, not realizing that overhead's going to go up. There's going to be other requirements. And that's, again, like I said, that's a big mistake, right? So we don't want to make those mistakes. Okay. The easiest way not to make that mistake and the easiest way to kind of, prevent it from happening is to regularly review your overhead. Regularly go through. And like I said, my rule of thumb is to do it on a monthly basis and make sure that we're making adjustments to that overhead. Okay. Once again, I hear this a lot too, is, different like parts of the year have seasonality to them. So, contractors, that maybe do exterior work, for example, may have less work in January and February. All right. And it amazes me to this day, but the first thing I see them do, because they're not acquiring customers, is, and March is a good example, is they come out, they give out 20 quotes, they don't get any jobs. What do you think they do? What have you guys done as a first remedy? Oh, come on, somebody. Humor me.
Then try and follow up.
Drop your prices.
Yeah, drop the prices.
Yeah. Happens all the time, right? It's a chronic symptom for some, because they don't have any other tool to understand the market, right? So if we're looking at our business almost primarily through pricing, if we think we are getting jobs or losing jobs just by pricing, all right, being the high guy or the low guy, you are putting in yourself in such a dangerous position, because the reality of it is, I mean, at the end of the day, if you really want to understand how the market works, it's supply and demand, right? So there are certain times of the year where we have less supply, more demand, vice versa, right? But what doesn't change is, at the end of the day, when you're pricing your job, you have labor, material, and overhead, right? So if you want to price a job and you feel like price is the problem with where you're at the market, the biggest mistake you can make is pricing it below your break even, right? And I see this all the time because guys don't get it, right? So a break even number is right in our job cost tool too, right? And I put it there to prevent guys from going below what they can technically do it for, right? So a lot of guys still, they don't factor in the overhead properly, right? So when you're looking at your price, and let's say you're using a number where, last summer you had calculated your break even or your overhead, all right, and it was $20,000. But since then, you've hired, an admin, okay, and we haven't included that in that break even. What happens? And we're going out and using that in the same markup and the same, or stealing somebody else's pricing model, wearing somebody else's underwear. You're that guy, you get caught wearing somebody else's underwear, right? Of course, what's going to happen, right?
Profit
We're
is
going to see
down.
we're going to see very quickly, and you can't, and again, guys think they can make up this with volume. You can't, right? So this is why understanding these numbers first and foremost is the key base stone of all pricing, right? So again, in that situation where you've got a lot of competition and everything else going on, and your volume has dropped, you actually have to raise your overhead to absorb that, right? You have to raise it. And I know it goes contrary to what most guys believe. Well, I just need to get the work, but what's the point in taking the work on and creating more risk and more exposure to your business if you're doing it at a negative profit? Not even negative profit. You're not even covering your overhead. What's the repercussions of that? How quickly can you sustain that for?
Go broke pretty
Damn.
quick.
Nope. It gets pretty ugly fast, right? And I've seen good companies, especially as we were coming out of COVID, I seen good companies that had good numbers and were kind of on the pulse during COVID when they were, we were a little bit more aware of these things. I feel anyways. And then coming out of COVID, they allowed themselves to become undisciplined. All right. And because there's been changes in the market, big ones, by the way, like not little ones. All right. Big changes, interest rates going up, all this other stuff, deflationary things going on in the economy. And they're still using pre-COVID or COVID numbers. All right. They never adjusted that formula. So the difference is they get to the end of that fiscal year, their accountant tells them, oh, yeah, by the way, you've lost $200,000, lost $300,000. Okay. Right? But I'm working, I have more work. I'm doing more work. I'm charging more. I hear this one as well, but I've raised my prices. Oh, okay. Perfect. You've raised your prices, but you're not really realizing that, hey, you also added XYZ and overhead, right? We got new trucks. We did all these other things. Everything else has gone up in cost, right? But you're not looking at those numbers and you're not raising fast enough or adjusting to the market, right? So that leaves us in a vulnerable position. And it doesn't matter how much work you do, right? The key here is if you want to be, apex predator in your market and be the most successful contractor is to find the equilibrium in your market, right? There is a balance between getting, the most amount of work and earning a profit, right? And the balance is dictated by the guys that know their numbers. Okay, the guys that actually aren't doing anything at a loss and that can be agile, right? Because I can play with numbers. I can adjust things and make myself, I can have our company do things at a break even. If I need to go in and I need that work, I'm going to buy it, right? But I'm not going to do that at a loss to the company. All right. I might do that for a 2 or 3 4% real profit, which I haven't had to do for a very long time and hope I don't have to. But again, it all comes back to understanding where those profit centers are and like being able to predict it and being able to actually navigate your company with those numbers. Okay. So the next thing we're going to talk about here, and another big problem that I'm seeing more and more of, is everybody wants to do everything. Okay. And that's great. In some situations, general contractors especially, I'm seeing this more and more frequently where, they have, everything under the sun. Okay. They're trying to be everything to everyone. And here's the big glaring problem with that, right? Number one is we can't be good at everything, right? Even GCs know that. Now, you could have good trades. Like, there's a lot of variables. I don't think I would ever in a million years want to be a full-blown general contractor, to be honest with you. It's just there's so many variables to being successful at it. Okay. So, I mean, but it's important that we look at it from revenue stream. Okay. Same with, specialty companies. Like, again, within roofing, you can have 12 different types of work that you do or a revenue stream. And we talk about this often. It's called market mix. Okay. So for service companies, understanding your market mix, super important. Not everything that you do. So if you're doing HVAC service and you're doing HVAC install, right? We're installing, um, you know, big units or whatever. Each one of those should operate as their own, we call them departments, but like their own separate business. If they can't carry their weight, all right, you either need to make a decision, and that decision has to do with like either you're going to increase the volume, right? You're going to increase the price, or you're going to get rid of it, right? Because it does come down to that. Are you going to give it enough time to grow and get to the place it needs to be, or are you going to cut the loss? And those are some of the most painful decisions you'll ever make in your business. Okay. So, but let's think about this way. If you guys were to just categorize your revenue streams, so for a general contractor, let's say we do windows, some remodel work, some cabinets, some specialty items. Okay. Each one of those, okay, would carry, if you're looking at your break evens properly and looking for what your gross profit should be on each one. All right. If you're doing lesser volume, or if you've got, your gross, sorry, hopefully I'm not confusing everybody here, but if your gross profit is, you're targeting, let's say 30% for the year. Okay. And you have these particular revenue streams on it. Each one of them should have their own overhead allocation. It should have its own calculation for how that is going to contribute to your overall plan, right? So again, some general contractors are, extremely good at getting remodeling work, right? They're in that niche. Bathrooms, I see it. Like, again, I'm going to treat those as their own revenue stream, and I'm going to make adjustments based on, how I'm advertising, how I'm actually operating that. So if that's my key offer, if that's my core offer, let's say it's bathroom remodeling, I'll use it as the example. Okay. And all my marketing dollars are going into that product or service, that revenue stream. All right. Let me just pause for a sec. Some people talking here. There we go. All right. Okay. So kind of coming back to this, and my bathroom business makes up 60% of what I do. Okay. What would the overhead look like that compared to the other Or what should it look like compared to the other revenue streams I have? Would it be higher, lower? Where do you think it would be?
Higher.
Higher. Okay, good answer. That is the correct answer. So your overhead would be higher, but as a percentage, okay, it would actually technically be lower because of the volume and what it
Yeah,
makes up,
okay.
right? So the dollar figure would be, but also with that should be, again, if you're capturing a lot of that business, all right, we should be looking at what is the backlog on that, all right? So another way to kind of get your prices adjusted and understand where you stand profit wise, and I don't see this a lot, is guys will keep the same pricing throughout the year. Service companies, another good example, they keep the same hourly rate throughout the year. What's the problems with that? Anybody think of one?
Fluctuations of calls during the year.
Right. You've got it, right? So it has your revenues, like, is anybody just getting the exact same revenue every single month? Is anybody doing that? Right to the dollar? Probably not.
No, no.
Not even close, right?
Wish.
Right. So, and here's the other thing that I seem this like it seems to be a very common problem is we have these killer months, all right, maybe 2, 3 months in a row, and in our mind we're killing it, right? And then for whatever reason something happens and you have 3 months of not so great revenue, all right? But you're only feeling the crunch of that at the end of the 3 months. What's happened, right? Has anyone ever experienced this? Right? Suddenly your
Huh?
accountant turns around you, told you in December you were profitable, you had 30%. That's when you looked at it, you were pumped, kept doing everything the same.
Your
Now,
cost go up.
yeah, right? So as an owner, if you're not looking at your financial numbers and understanding where you are, okay, very easily is that you can become complacent with your own numbers, with your own, projections. So like again, if we're not reviewing these things and doing it at a consistency and having them at actually it's very important to have it at certain times of the month, right? Should we be finding out that we didn't cover overhead on the 30th of the month? No. Anybody see the problem with that? Does it give you any time to adjust? Any time to negotiate? Any time to talk to? No. So then we're carrying that, right? And usually, again, it's just all it takes is a little bit of complacency and then not seeing your numbers, regularly enough to make these major mistakes, right? To make these major errors that cost us, right? And then what do? We react, okay? And we go out and get a bunch of jobs, right? I see this, it's like a never-ending circle, right? So then we put the big push on getting jobs and selling work. We make the mistake of maybe underpricing some of those, and the problem continues. It's covered up by the sins of revenue. So the revenue goes up. It seems like you're covering your bills, but there's still that loss there. All right. It's just being covered up by new cash coming into the system. Right. And we see this the most like this time of year I do. I have lots of clients that will do funny things like, Jay, turn off all my marketing today. Why? Because I have a cash flow problem. Ah, okay. So when you get down into it, you understand that, hey, you know what? They don't actually have a cash flow problem. They made a mistake back in December, all right, that lowered their gross profit numbers, and they took on something that they maybe shouldn't have or did something that they shouldn't have, and now that's playing out in their real world now, where if they had recognized that earlier, they could have corrected it, right? Or mitigated it. That's probably a better way to say it. We want to look at how to mitigate these problems, how to see. So if you had 3 months before, you were going to have a cash flow issue, which you should, all right? And hopefully you guys all get to that point. All right. How is that going to change your behavior today? How's that going to change your decisions? I'll tell you what I would be doing. There's only two real things that you can do. Number one I'm going to look at all my costs and see what I can eliminate, right? So I'm going to cut costs. Okay. Number two, I'm going to look at, opportunities to increase my revenue and production. All right. So again, if I know in 3 months I'm going to have a cash problem, all right, which is not uncommon, and it's already trending that way because markets go up, go down. All right. The first thing we're going to do is look at what costs that we're maybe carrying that are inflated. Second, how do I increase profits and how do I increase the production?
Jay?
Yep.
What about like unproductive employees?
So again, this is a fantastic, thank you for bringing that up. Again, you would see that immediately in your numbers, right? So if you and we certainly can, right? So if you're looking at variables, so like again, when you review your overhead expense, okay, and you review your numbers, let's say at the 15th of the month for the previous month, all right, and you have a technician that has been dragging his ass for a month, where are you going to see that? Where would you see it?
In your job costing?
In your job costing, yeah. So your profits will come way down. Again, expenses will go up, so more hours than what was priced for, estimated for. And again, if you have black and white information like that, like again, if your technician was able to fulfill, 75 calls and had an average ticket price of $800, and you gave him, the same 75 calls and his ticket price dropped to 400, do you have a problem? Right. Okay. And again, does that take a whole bunch of counseling and, kumbaya and holding hands to figure out?
Bye-bye.
Right? Well, no, again, it becomes a black and white conversation, and you'd be amazed at like the amount of leadership that can come from just bringing people information, stating what's happening, and telling them to correct it. Right? But if you're
Wow.
not capable of seeing those numbers, what do we end up doing?
Losing money.
Well, we lose money, but we don't even realize. So another good example is here we are praising the guy. Oh, this is my best installer, and I've done this. Everybody probably has. I couldn't live without this guy. I can't work without this guy. He's our best, number one technician. But if you were really looking at your numbers, you would know that he's actually like the business has been declining as he's been declining, right? We seen this like probably the best example I can share with you and the most painful, most traumatizing one I have is I had a guy that worked for me almost since the day I started my business. All right. I actually had a few of them, but about 5 or 6 years ago, um, if you had asked me if, who my best guy was, oh, I would praise this guy up and down. Okay. What we started to do was look at individuals' performance and crew performance. And what we started realizing very quickly is that his average cost, all right, was about $46 an hour. Okay. When I had other crews that their average cost was overall, all right, was like, and I'm using rough numbers here, I don't remember them specifically, but like they were about 15 to 20% less than him. So that they were like $40 an hour. And it didn't matter which job. If you looked at every one of them individually, all right, anytime he was on a job site, the cost was higher. All right. Now, the insult to injury was we also got the most amount of callbacks. We had the most amount of customer service issues. All right, phone calls, like when you start to calculate those things and you remove your emotions from it and you're using the math instead of your connection with that person, all right, the decision is glaringly right in front of you. And it was probably the toughest one I had to make, and letting him go. And we paid him huge amount of severance and all that kind of stuff, but it was the right decision. And when I did actually let him go, and I used the number thing, right? Again, like explain to me why this is happening. And he told me flat out, you know what? He's not motivated. Didn't want to work here anymore. It's like perfect. Right? So we let him go. And that happens. Okay. Again, I guess the cruelest way I can put this is at the end of the day, all good, horses go lame, right? In your business and you guys know too, right? Even being an employee at sometimes you burn out, right? And we go lame. There's things that I no longer do in my business that at one point I had a lot of passion, was very good at, but now I just don't do them. Right? So again, keep this in mind. And where is that point where you discover those things? How do you see those things? How do you prevent the damage from happening to your company? It's exactly what I'm showing you guys here, right? The first place you're going to see it is in your numbers. Okay, your numbers aren't going to lie. Your gross profit, that's a big indicator. You need to ask the questions. Like if I did what I was supposed to do and we went out and we acquired, $500,000 worth of work, all right, and I planned and scheduled for, this profit percentage, whatever it may be, and we didn't get it. Now we can go down the line and figure out why, right? And usually it's going to come back down to, decisions that we made. Maybe it was, a bad foreman, bad project manager, right? An estimator on their way out. Like all those things start to show up well before they actually leave, well before you identify that problem from your own perception. They show up in your numbers. You could track back, in my case, like years, literally years before it, like talk about quiet quitting, right? If I was looking back and as far back as we went, four years or whatever, we were seeing it, right? So again, I challenge all of you guys here to do a couple of things for yourself. Number one is figure out what you want to earn this year, what your company should return to you. All right. Figure out what your actual overhead is. All right. So again, and when you compare the month, right? If you do your overhead for the month, if you have your balance sheet, your profit and loss that are up to date and completed, go and look at that. Go and look at that number. All right. Look how much it goes up and down. You'll be shocked. Even if you have a very stable business, I see it go up 5 to 6 to 8%, and we're controlling it. Now, can you imagine people who have no idea where it is at any point, making decisions without any of that overhead understanding, right? Where does that go? How much could that fluctuate? It can fluctuate huge. I've seen it upwards to 20%. Imagine a 20% change and doing nothing to offset that. That's unless you're doing really good, that's a painful crash landing if I ever seen one. Okay. Anybody have any takeaways or any questions about what we're discussing? I know this is complicated, and we're kind of going through it quickly, but for most of you, it should be a refresher. Um, Anybody really struggle with understanding their overhead? All right, got a couple of pros in
Yeah.
here today.
Yes, it's difficult, man. That's a lot of crap to go through to figure that out. And as I'm learning more and more of how
Mhm.
important it is, man.
Right. Well, and I mean, again, like, how do you predict your cash flow? Like, if you don't know what it's going to require you to have in cash to run your business with, optimum performance, we'll call it. All right. Um, how quickly is it to get yourself in trouble? Right. So you may actually, and I see this a lot too, the number one reason for contractors going out of business, believe it or not, is not because they didn't earn a profit like we would think, right? Not because they weren't earning profits. It's actually cash flow problems. They go out because they run out of cash. And that usually comes after their company has boomed. They did a bunch of work, were just, 6 gear pinned, maybe got, a little bit complacent with spending, right? Thought they were really, on top of it and my company's doing great, not reading the variables properly, and then overspent and created a cash flow crisis for themselves. I see this a lot with, again, operators. They go out and buy the $300,000, $500,000 machine because, they can't keep up with demand. And then something changes where they lose 20% of their revenue, and all of a sudden they can't make payments. Right?
That's like my business here in Dallas, Texas, being a
Yep.
general contractor. I know it's going to slow down the
Mhm.
middle of July to the middle of September every year. It does it every year. And then from
Right.
the day after Christmas to the middle of February again. And
Right.
I literally, to be able to figure out, oh, hey, man, I need to make sure I have this much money reserved would be amazing.
Oh, and again, Cody, you're in our program, so we will get this for you.
Oh, yeah,
Because
I can see you moving forward to it for sure.
yeah, this has everything to do with WIP too, right? So like, and your sales forecast. So like if you take all, and like I have the sales forecaster that we'll get set up with you, but most people don't even understand the patterns to their business, the revenue patterns. If you were to go back and look at it, you could make a sales forecast for today. You could say with pretty scary amount of accuracy, all right, where you would be based on your historic data, right? And where you need to offset. And I talk about this quite a bit, even with service-based companies, is that you already kind of know from the pain that June and July are slow, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Right. So that means that you actually need to be pushing harder in marketing in April and May, but you're busy already. So it kind of goes against what our instincts say, right? So like, have you ever had that moment where you're like, oh my God, I got all this work. I need to just focus on producing it.
Yeah, 100%.
And then we start slipping on our sales and our marketing, not realizing that, hey, we don't have enough in the bag yet. We haven't actually acquired enough work in backlog to get us through that month. Right? Like
Yeah.
we're gonna come up
Yeah.
3, 4 weeks, and that's what I see over and over again is like 3 months of just solid growth and then crash, right? And yes, the market has obviously some to do with it, but think about it the other way, like how easy would it have been in April or May to negotiate for a start in June and July when you were slower,
Yeah.
right?
I should think that way. And now I am after looking at all the numbers that you've had me
Yep.
looking at. I definitely, I see it now.
Well, it's more about consistency, right? So again, every time you're
Yeah.
moving your like it's not good for you to be higher or lower. You got to find that sweet spot, right? So for, let's just assume here that, your sweet operating like sweet spot's going to be, between 90 and $100,000, right? In revenue. You're geared for that. Okay? If you do 80, you're going to have a problem with cash flow. All right. Now, just like the same, if you do, 120, all right, you're actually going to see a fall in profits as well. Okay. Because then you start to, you start to overheat things. Right. So the best example is, we sold 60 hours and our guys are only going to give us 40. Right. So again, it's about finding that spot and knowing where you have to hit as a target and not overdoing it, because contractors in general have that same problem as well, right? Is that, you know, doing double the work that you did the month previous is not good for your business, and it's going to cause big problems. You're going to burn guys out. You're going to increase your costs. You're going to have mistakes, right? There's going to be estimating mistakes. There's going to be, over ordering. There could be just, you name it. All right. It's because we're not paying attention anymore. We're just putting ourselves into, I need to get all this work done. All right. And it's
Yeah,
feast.
100%. I can put that to a T.
Right.
Every time we get busy, I'm like, holy crap, how did I lose money? And
Right.
it's because I missed things on the estimates.
Right. Well, and again, you should be looking at your business like this, right? So like if your sweet spot, and let's say where you're optimally profitable, all right, where it's not a lot of stress, you're not like overdoing it, like you're only working your 40 hours and you're making, you know, 20% net profit. Okay. Your goal should be to put your company in that position every single month and fight to have it at that mark. But because we're not paying attention and running our business with the numbers, all right, what happens is that we get greedy. All right, we try to take on more than we should. We stress ourselves out, and then we make all these mistakes. Right, we don't get pricing from our suppliers. We let costs go up without adjusting. We do all of these other fundamental mistakes trying to chase something that we're going to lose on anyways, right? Versus again, looking at it from more of a consistency and a risk management position, right? Now, I'm not stupid. Like I understand that, no matter what, being perfect, there is no perfect in contract. There is no way to be bang on 100% all the time. You can get close, and my God, I have gotten myself pretty close to it a few times where I could say I'm almost perfect, but the truth and reality is I still have to make big adjustments, and I'm holding myself accountable to these things, and I have good people around me that are better at it than I am, right? But again, you have to understand what the impacts are going to be of things happening in your business, right? So I use the example as lawsuit, right? If you've ever had to settle a lawsuit, they don't exactly give you 90 days to pay it back, right? Like you're pretty much expected to pay out whatever damages you may have caused, almost immediately, right? So let's say you've lost $100,000 lawsuit, okay, and you got to come up with that cash, all right, and it pulls the cash out of your business or does, wherever, okay. What's your response? What are your steps? How do you adjust for that so that again it doesn't wipe out the business eventually? Because you may be able to come up with the money at the time, all right, but wouldn't you want to know what's going to happen in 2, 3, 6 months down the road? If you like, do you not want to know how to, correct the path? Can you do that with your emotions? Can you just try harder? Anybody really kind of won from just trying harder? I certainly have not. You can try as hard as you want. If you're doing the same thing that's not working, you're just gonna find out the hard way, right? So before we jump off and kind of to finish this off, I'll give you one more tool that you guys can use that's super, super helpful for this. And I feel all of you should have. It is a little bit more complex, but a flex budget. Okay, so I'm going to explain this really briefly, and if you guys have any questions about it, okay, let me know. I'm happy to jump on a call and we'll work it out. But a flex budget is simply this. We're going to take whatever our revenue projection is, our sales forecast for the month. All right. So let's say that we need to hit $100,000, or in this case, $83,000 is like your sweet spot. You're going to have all your variable costs, your fixed costs. All right. And you're going to have those broken down into your budget. So this is directly from your profit and loss and your balance sheet. Okay. But you're going to input these numbers here so that we can run scenarios with them. Okay. So what does happen if we hit 90K? All right. And then most importantly, out of all this, like I said, you don't actually make more profit doing 110%. And the only way you're going to find that out is to see it yourself. Right. So, those months where you did 120% above normal, all right, you'll actually find that you made less profit doing it. All right. Vice versa, if you do 80%, okay, and you're below normal, you're also going to be at a loss. All right. So our ideal position is to be, between 90 and we'll say 90 and 110. All right. Now, when something does happen, okay, you have so many little things going on and so many little operations. If you're running a decent sized business, so many expenses coming in and things that are moving quickly, especially if you're not the bookkeeper, which I don't imagine any of you guys should be. All right. But at the end of the month, or the 15th of the month, I should say, all right, we should be reviewing these things. Where were the losses from? Where were we off? Okay. If you can be, and again, it's a discipline thing, but if you can be within a 2 or 3% variance in your expenses on your business, okay, you can navigate your business just about anywhere if you're capable of doing that. All right. Now that's something I try to. We're not perfect at it. I mean, even if you can get within 5%, you're laughing. All right. That literally that's master level. Okay. You imagine that being able to predict, your finances to within a 2 to 3% variance. What kind of power does that give you? Anybody think of any kind of benefit to that? I'm going to tell
Confidence
you.
is way up in what you're doing. So
Yeah. Well,
Sleep better, that's for sure.
yep, absolutely. How
Yeah.
about this? You would fire quicker, right? With confidence, right?
mhm.
We would replace faster with confidence. Okay.
Mhm.
Um, the most important thing though is that we would benefit when the economy crashes. Right? This is where I've been trying to lead the conversation. And what I want to kind of wrap up with is that I look forward and enjoy when there's doubt or people get scared in our economy. Like bring on a recession, please. All right. I am all game for it. Yes, my business will shrink and I'll see profits lower, but like at the end of the day, I know I can adjust to it and adapt to it faster than any of my competitors can. And what's that do? All right. Yes, we're going to have short-term pain, but the longer term game is that there's less competition. There's more of an opportunity for me. And again, we good companies always grow through recession. They always grow through hard times. And the reason they grow is because they understand the numbers. They know how to adapt, all right, without giving away the house. Right. So again, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, can you do me a favor? This is
Sure.
right next to the forecasting tool, which
Yeah.
I've been kind of poking around in. And there's one field in there I'm trying to get my head around is where does that number come from? Because it doesn't relate to a date. So
What's
if you
that?
go into cash flow summary,
Okay. On which document, sorry?
it's your 12-week cash forecasting tool, which we're going to implement.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me pull that
So
up.
when I'm looking in there, I'm seeing this start date, for example, for your first week,
Right.
38066, and I can see the formula is adding 7 days on top.
Right.
But to come up with that, where did that 38066 come from? Because I'm thinking if you started in January, if it was, let's say, year 250, like, you follow me?
Yeah.
Like where's that first date coming from?
So that would be the first date that you're starting the cash flow projection from. So the reason I believe that I did that, and I love these questions. That's so good. It's making me think. The reason I did that is because it was to run different scenarios. So I'll give you an example. If I took my sales forecast from January, so if I'm looking into
Mhm.
January, all right, and
Mhm.
I wanted to adjust my sales forecast for that, all right, I would start the cash flow projection from January. Okay.
Mhm.
Now, again, if I want to start it from, let's say I'm looking at February or June, whatever it may be. All right, I'm going to start
Mhm.
it from that point. All right, to see how my cash flow is going to play out. So, how this scenario would work is like we know, and I know that my business is going to slow down dramatically. I'm thinking in the range of about 15 to 20% this year. Okay,
Mhm.
because of the thing. So, where am I going to see that? I'm not going to see that for 3 months because I was already at full capacity. I'm actually going to see it in probably June, July, and August.
It's
Okay.
coming, yeah.
Right. So now I'm going to take my forecast from last year, what I
Mhm.
would normally be on, what I was trending for. All right. I'm going to take 25% off that, and I'm going to start my sales forecast from there to see what the impact's going to be.
Mhm.
Does that make sense? So like a lot of about
Okay.
just looking at these things in different scenarios. What if this happens? What if that happens? Like again, you want to fire a technician and you know it's going to be 90 days before you can replace them. And that's going to have what kind of impact? You're going to lose revenue, all right, in the business,
Yeah.
right? So again, you can if you get really good at this, you can predict what those impacts will look like within a pretty reasonable amount. Right? So now we're thinking about something well in advance and we have enough time to adapt, right?
Mhm.
It's not knowing though that gets you in trouble. Like when you blissfully walk into a brick wall, all right, it still hurts. Like I don't know what to say. But if you had enough time to, not walk into the brick wall, it's not going to hurt, right? That was a terrible
Hey,
example, but
so this is not in the budget, but in the cash flows summary
yep.
document, I'm looking at cash flow and I'm looking in the first green column there where it has a blue thing. It says 38066. And I'm thinking, well, how does that relate to a date? I can see that it goes 38073 7 days later, but where's the
Right.
3806? Like
You
where?
got me on that one. I have to take a look at it. I'll
Yeah,
have
no
to.
problem.
I know that it's
Yeah,
doing like 7 day projections and then
yeah.
it'll wrap up because again you can set that cash flow projection because if you're putting in the data for it, you can put it in from a
Mhm.
forecast,
Yeah.
right?
So yeah, we can just plug in our numbers in here. This is
Yeah.
very easy to use. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and where like the sales forecast document or the tool that I gave you plays
Mhm.
in, right? They're all meant for planning. They're all meant to look into the future. But that sales forecaster, you can look at your historic number and then go
Mhm.
from any point in the year based on what you've done previous years, right? And it's going to be pretty accurate. right? So again, like I said, you would use it for projecting growth or projecting, decline, right? And that's going to help you to make adjustments now to get prepared for that, right? So make a little more sense.
Mhm.
Okay. Cool. Well, guys, I hope you take some action. If you want to take some immediate imperfect actions, start playing with some of these forecast tools. I'm totally open. You can bring them to any of our calls. We can discuss them. And let's get these things in place. And if everybody can take the one imperfect action today and get your overhead recovery rate, right? You should be doing that. It's that time of the month as well, right? We should have been reviewing it and making adjustments to our pricing for March, right? So if you didn't recover your overhead, right, make that adjustment so that you're looking at what it's going to cost you to break even in your pricing problem. Cool. Everyone have a wonderful day. We'll talk soon.